Hi, welcome as always. I'm Yann Ilunga, that's Connie Steele. And Connie, today I thought that we could sort of kick off a mini series on something that can be quite the pain in the neck, which are challenges, obstacles related to content creation. I mean, you know they say content is king, right?
Oh, yeah. But even though content is king, that doesn't mean that people aren't struggling with trying to figure out how to do it in the
Mhm.
most, efficient and authentic way.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I mean, we have identified four challenges. So in this video, we're gonna focus on the first one, and we're gonna do so in each video. So we're gonna really dive straight into the point, sharing our expertise, our experiences as well, because I'm sure that both you and I, in our content creation endeavors, have faced the challenges here. And the first one, I know for a fact, I've been facing it many times, and it's basically the idea that planning and creating content is time consuming. So maybe I'm going to start to share my experience. But first, Connie, I want to ask you, in your experience creating, well, we are creating video content right now. I know you have created written content, audio content with your podcast. You have been a guest as well. Has it been a time consuming thing for you to consistently create content?
Absolutely. So I'll even talk about it not just from a personal perspective, but from a professional perspective, when I've been the head of marketing for different organizations and even as that executive consultant, helping out different organizations on their efforts. So first, from a professional side, when I was starting out and doing my own consulting, I didn't have a lot of content, even though I knew as a marketer, I should have my own thought leadership content out there to showcase my perspectives. But to sit down, think about the topic, write about it, even though I could have an editorial calendar, it was so challenging because you're going back and forth on your thoughts. You're trying to figure out the best way to put it together, just sitting there and typing, figure out the right words to say in the right cadence. It's just, you could spend hours, and you might even end up spending 3-4 hours to write something like not a very long article, but it's just because of getting in the mode to write is not easy. Even though you could be somebody who creates content for everybody else, when it comes to yourself, it can be quite challenging. So I'd say that's one instance where most people, when they think of content, at least I know when I started, it was written, and written can be very difficult. Doing video content was absolutely not easy for me. Doing something like this with you, no way was it just, oh yeah, I will hit record and just talk. I had this desire to make it perfect, I guess, because you want to make sure that you're short and sweet and to the point. So all those different content formats were challenging for me because it wasn't a default medium that I used. So again, the thought process of doing it and even trying it will be so time consuming because it wasn't natural and I couldn't do it efficiently. From a corporate side, it's also a similar situation that when you are trying to create content for the business, you're getting requests all the time from every part of the organization, and they want you to create white papers or articles or case studies. But to find the time to sit down and concentrate and convey the most important thoughts in the different mediums is difficult because your mind is being bounced across all the different responsibilities that you have, but also trying to think through as efficiently as possible, how do you convey those points in those different mediums? So again, written is going to be different than video, is going to be different than audio. And so because of all that, of this planning and switching and so forth, it just takes so much time to do because you don't build the efficiencies to say, okay, if I'm going to do articles, that's all I do for the next couple of weeks. You don't have that luxury because you're constantly getting bombarded with requests. So that, in short, is my experience. Yann, what about yours? Because I know you've had it not just on the personal front, but also on the professional front too.
Yeah, I second what you said. And yeah, I kind of feel the pain because it has been the same for me. And I think actually in your comment, Connie, you touched upon a very good point. because you said that obviously creating written content is different than creating audio content, and the same for video content. But I also, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, yes, one of the reasons why content creation is so time consuming, especially when we're looking at it from a corporate standpoint, so there may be different stakeholders, different players involved, is that sometimes it's challenging because there isn't a very well-defined process to follow step by step. So for example, in the case of written content, how do we go about, sure, we create the content, so we write it, but where do we write it? Is it in Word and then we email it to somebody who, for example, proofreads it, or do we write it into a tool like, let's say, Google Docs, where everybody can look at it, can collaborate on it, can proofread, can add comments? What about linking? Are we gonna add links as we write, or are we gonna first write the entire article and then decide where to link? What about SEO, search engine optimization? Are we gonna just write and then try to optimize, or first we optimize and then we write, keeping those SEO guidelines or tips in mind? What about images and videos? If we want to add them into our written content, are we just gonna add those to the end? As we're gonna add them as we deem relevant? So if I'm writing and then I think, here an image would be very good, I just stop with the writing and go and look for the image and then come back. I think those are very important aspects to think about. I know for me, that has been something that has been really a productivity killer when I didn't have a clear way to go about written content. For audio content, a similar thing can be said. For me, what I found that has been really the solution is obviously to define a process so that it removes the guesswork. So for example, when it comes to recording a podcast, what I always do, and it doesn't matter whether it's a solo episode, whether I'm being interviewed as a guest, whether it's an interview, whether it's a roundtable conversation, I always think about first, what is the outcome? What is the learning outcome I want listeners to learn? So in other words, I would say to myself, by the time they're finished listening to the episode, they've learned about whatever the thing is, or they'll be able to do 1, 2, 3, or they'll know more about this and that. Then I just reverse engineer the steps needed to be taken there. And I just use a project management tool called ClickUp. So I typically have a task created, let's say, for a podcast episode, and I have a list of bullet points. And those are very useful for me when I'm recording, or even if I'm a guest, because A, they make sure that I don't forget important things. And B, as I have that open in front of me, as I'm talking about something, I can look at the point that's coming up next. So I'm able to make a smooth transition between what I'm discussing now and what's coming up next. Whereas if I wouldn't really be sure about that, I may be like, okay, so, well, all right, so let's talk about this other thing. And then maybe when there is the editing, the post-production, I or the team isn't happy with that transition, and we need to either record it again, or we need to do something to kind of make it sound better. So for me, I personally think that when it comes to the time consumption challenge of content creation, obviously here in this series, we're talking about corporate podcasting. And if you're curious about different aspects related to developing a corporate podcasting show, we have covered that in past videos that you find whatever you're watching or listening to us, you find the previous chapters as well. But for me, Connie, the advice I would give is to actually sit down and think about what that content planning, production, editing, and publishing process looks like. So let's think about those 4 phases. Who is responsible for what, where, in which tool, which platform, and what is the first step, what is the second step, and what are the steps that follow? So that then when it's time, for example, to brainstorm, if there is a specific workflow in mind, people are going to be able to be very efficient with their brainstorming sessions. I mean, I know you and I, Connie, have done some brainstorming, and sometimes it has been maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and we walk away with weeks, if not months worth of content, which is terrific. So for me, I think that working on developing, crafting a workflow that can really be followed as a blueprint, step by step, is the solution to the time consumption challenge of creating content. What about you, Connie? Do you have any final remarks you wanna share when it comes to the challenge of time consuming content creation?
I echo everything that you just said, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it is absolutely the case that when you're not strategic in the way you think about your workflow, it becomes can be a very chaotic and jumbled exercise to try to get it all done. I think what was so valuable in your point that you said, that it starts with that process, and I even would take it back even further, which you had mentioned before, which was the planning. What's the strategy? So a lot of times the challenge people have when it comes to being so time consuming is because of the fact that they weren't clear up front on what is the strategic purpose of the content they're trying to create. And subsequently, how do you then think through the execution of that? Because when you can spend the time upfront to understand what are you strategically trying to do, lay the necessary plans in place to get that done, the back and forth that you will have with other people. So again, if we look at a sort of a corporate setting, the amount of back and forth that you have and approvals and what's right, what images and where you want to house it and so forth, you can minimize it because you spend the time upfront to create clarity and get alignment on what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, where it's going to be, and what the desired outcome is. So 100% agree. Those 4 steps you mentioned, that's the key.
Yeah, actually, as I was listening to you, light bulb went on, and it's a good thing because it's something worth mentioning. Now, I'm gonna kind of caution people with this, with what I'm about to say, because it's something that I think you need to make work for your own context and for your own company and the way you go about things. And I'm talking about batch producing content. I know, for example, with podcasting, there are some podcasters who may say, oh, okay, I spend a day each week or a day a month where I record 4 episodes, 5 episodes, 10 episodes, one after the other. And they just do that for several hours. They're able to do it. They do it with podcast hosting. They do it with podcast guesting. I know we do it with video. And I think there are obviously pros because of batch recording, because obviously you try to be very, very lasered in the recording or production of the content, and you show up. If it's like us, you turn on your webcam, you start recording, and you're really laser focused on that. So I think the main pro of batch recording is the fact that it lets you really leverage a specific window of time as well as you could do that. So in a way, if we think about time management strategies, that would be, what is it called? I think time boxing, where you really make the most out of that time block, which is great. And it doesn't disrupt your workflow in a way. So if you think about your weekly workflow, if you would be recording a bit on Monday morning and then on Tuesday afternoon and then on Wednesday afternoon and then back to Thursday morning, it can kind of be disruptive. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, that sometimes we just can get in the zone, mindset-wise, inspiration-wise. So that's very good. One of the challenges, though, is that it may not be as easy as you think to batch produce content. I know in the past, for a virtual conference I organized called Podcast Summit, I did in one day, I did 6 interviews back to back. So I was basically interviewing people for, I want to say 4 hours, 5 hours for the next days that followed. I had no voice. So that was too much for my voice. So this is just to say that on the one side, there are pros to batch recording when it comes to content creation being time consuming, but there is also some possible or potential cons that you need to be mindful of.
100% agree. And I love that additional solution to really think about how you can be as efficient as possible by grouping those tasks together or grouping the content that you want to create together in such a way that you can get in the rhythm and get in the zone. And all that gets back to, the point that we had talked about in other corporate podcasting episodes of have the plan, right? Know the strategy, have the plan, outline what you want to do, so that when you do have this period where you're doing your batch recording or batch writing, whatever it may be, it's very clear what you're trying to do. And then everything else in terms of the implementation will flow pretty easily.
Yeah, indeed. So this was just the beginning. We're gonna cover other challenges related to creating content. As we said earlier, this is just the latest in a series of videos we have created. So if you want to watch or listen to more of our corporate podcasting related content, you can find it on the Flywheel Associates website, as well as the blog, and of course, the YouTube channel as well. This is everything. We'll see you for part 2 of this mini series of content creation challenges.